All right, hey everyone, welcome to the Brew Nerds Hangout. This is our first hangout, and I've got most everyone here from the panel joining us. First, we got Jason Gaisley, right? Gaisley? Or is it Gaisley?
Hello.
And we also have Jameson Steppen. And I am Michael Tangen, founder of the Brew Nerds. And we're going to be talking equipment, or rather brewing system options and methods. We're going to be covering 4 different systems today. We're going to be talking about brew in a bag, which has been a very hot topic as of late, especially within the community. There's a lot of interest around it. We're going to talk 3-tier gravity systems. Then we're going to cover RIMS, which is recirculated infusion mash. And then finally, we're going to cover heat exchange recirculation mash system, which is HERMS. So, and then follow at the end with a little time of open Q&A, and I'll be monitoring on the Brew Nerds community. We've got a forum or a posting where you can post your questions here. It's like about 3 posts down. So, if you've got questions for during the hangout and would like to post them there, that is the place to do it, and we'll be watching that. So, without further ado, we're going to dive right into Brew in a Bag. And first, we're going to watch a video clip that overachiever Jameson put together. Got music, overlays, and everything's very nice. Very nice presentation. But it's an overview of the Brew in the Bag system.
Hello, my name is Jameson. And like many homebrewers, I got my start with extract brewing. Extract brewing is a great way to brew beer, and I still brew extract beers all the time. But when you want to start to experiment with all-grain brewing, sometimes the cost and additional equipment can seem rather prohibitive. That's where Brew in the Bag comes in. For just a very small investment above what you already have in your extract brewing kit, you can start to learn the art of mashing and really step up your brew design another notch. So today, I'm going to give you a tour of the equipment that most brew in a bag brewers use and that I use so that you can start to learn how to use this technique to turn a bag of this into this. The first thing that you'll need is a nice 5-gallon pot. 5 gallons is a great size for doing 2.5-gallon brew in a bag batches. When you brew in a bag, you don't have to sparge your grains, but if you do, you'll get a lot more efficiency. If you decide to sparge, you'll also need a 3-gallon pot to hold your sparge water. Additionally, you'll also need all the regular brewing equipment from your extract setup. Once your brew in a bag is done mashing, the boil is exactly like an extract kit, but you don't add more water at the end. You'll also need a strainer to hold the bag of grains after mashing. You'll want to either sparge your grains or simply let them drain into your wort. Make sure your strainer can't fall into the pot. A bag of wet grains can get quite heavy. And finally, and most importantly, you'll need a bag. You can get bags like this at any brewing store. You'll want to try to get a bag big enough to fit around the outside of your kettle. This will make the whole mashing process a lot easier. So that's a quick tour of Brew in a Bag equipment. Happy brewing!
All right, so that's Brew in a Bag, the video. It looks, to answer your question, I know it's not actually backwards. It looks backwards on the presentation. All right.
We got a question in the thread asking about watching the hangout.
Okay. It should actually. We've got postings on Brew Nerds actually about. I think we actually posted the hangout video, the link to it. So on the Brew Nerds community, you should be able to see it. But
Just saying we have people asking how to see it. That's why they obviously can't hear you.
I know they can't, which I'm realizing that. All right. So we don't actually have any questions per se in the thing about brew in a bag, but actually, Jameson, why don't you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what for you, what the jump was from what it was like going from extract to starting the brew in a bag process, what that was like for you.
Well, the nice thing about brew in the bag is that it really wasn't a lot more equipment. It was basically it was the pot that I had. I ended up going with a little bit larger pot, and just because I wanted to control boiler and things like that. And then I also had to invest in the bag and mill, though you don't necessarily need a mill to mill your grains if you do it at the store ahead of time. So the experience of learning to mash was kind of interesting. I have tried lots of different types of mashing. I've tried step mashing. I've tried full volume mashing. And so learning kind of how to use, work with both of those was interesting. In general, though, really, the nice thing about brew in the bag is that you do your mash, and if you just do a no sparge, full volume mash, it's really not much different than just doing an extract kit. You know, you get your water to the correct temperature, you soak your grains for an hour, you pull them all out, and let it drain into the pot so you get a full volume of water. You boil it, and you're good to go. So it wasn't too much of a transition, but it definitely opened up a lot of possibilities. So for doing for different types of brews and such. So
cool. So what would you say is probably the greatest challenge in terms of brew in a bag, or maybe someone who's coming into it for the first time?
You know, one of the biggest challenges actually is making sure you have a big enough bag. That sounds like a really silly thing to think about, but making sure you have a big enough bag is definitely one of the main things. And learning how to handle a huge bag of wet grains without making a mess. Those were really kind of the two biggest challenges, because you get the grains in there, and the actual process of mashing, you know, it's like boiling water, you know, in a lot of ways. You know, you get it to especially if you're doing just a simple single infusion mash, you get your grains in there, you at the right temperature, you stir them every 15-20 minutes, make sure they stay at that temperature, and you're good to go. I think the difficult thing in terms of mashing this way versus mashing in a pot, for example, is that you temperature control in an aluminum kettle is much different than like a cooler. So when you're doing a 3-tiered system, you have the cooler, and I actually now am doing brew in a bag in a cooler now for my 5-gallon batches. That thing holds temperature. I mean, those things are great at holding temperature. You know, just this last week I did a 5-gallon batch, mashed it in for an hour, and I think I lost 1 degree. And that's opening it up a couple times to stir it. I mean, those things are amazing. In a pot, in a metal kettle, you do lose temperature a lot faster.
Yep. So, what would you say is for you? What is the greater from going from extract to brew in a bag? What has been the most awesome part about making that transition? What have you enjoyed most about brew in a bag?
Getting to experiment with recipe creation. You know, obviously getting to basically start from a bag of grains. That's the coolest thing. Yeah. You know, being able to just, you know, look at various recipes that people have done online and say, all right, I'm going to do that recipe, and I'm going to maybe add a couple little things here to tweak. And then that, you know, that's been the coolest part, I think, for me. And that's more just a step from going, you know, extract to all grain in general. We go extract all grain in general. The recipe creation is always fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's one of the things I just really encourage all of our extract brewers, just give it a try. You really, as Jameson pointed out in his video, it's really not a significant investment. You know, $6 for a 24 by 24 bag, more than enough to fit a standard 5-gallon stainless steel or aluminum kettle. Yeah, it works great. We're going to move right along to a 3-tier system, and we'll check out the video that I threw together for that.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I am the founder of the Brew Nerds Community, and I'm here to talk about my system. It's a 3-tier gravity-fed system, meaning there's basically a 3-tier structure, and everything is fed by gravity. There's no pumps, no mess, no fuss. The 3 tiers are as follows. You've got the hot liquor tank, which is the storage of really hot water. It's 170 degrees that we use for sparging. Sparging is a process of rinsing your grain. Right here we have the mash tun. It's just a simple kettle with a false bottom in it. The false bottom basically allows me to filter out all of the grain and get just the wort out of there. And then of course down at the bottom here, the boil kettle. It's a really easy system to work with. I just use one burner right now to heat up both my strike water, which is the water that the grain initially meets with in the mash tun, as well as the sparge water, which I use up here in this cooler. There are a wide variety of different system options available. You don't have to have a kettle for a mash tun. There are plenty of people that actually use coolers to do their mashing in which case instead of using a burner to increase the temperature of your mash, you would do water infusion. So you would heat up your water elsewhere, add the water into your mash tun to raise up the temperature. Or you could do an old German technique called decoction mashing, where you actually pull some of the grain out and the wort, boil that, and then bring that in. So that's basically my system. It's really easy for me to use. Eventually I'll probably build it out a little bit further, bring some pumps to actually help automate the process of bringing the water up in here so I don't have to do as much heavy lifting. But by and large, what I like about this process is it's simple, and I can brew up to 6 gallons really easily, and its cleanup is easy. There's not many moving parts, and there's a lot less points of failure for things to go wrong. So cost-wise, it's also pretty accessible. Probably the most expensive pieces are the burner and maybe the kettles with some of the pre-drilled things for like the temperature gauge as well as the ball valve. But by and large, everything else is pretty inexpensive. I also use these shelf systems that I got at Home Depot. They're really nice. They're on wheels and I can move them about and position them however I want. I can move it out further into the driveway or move it about in the garage. One point of safety, I do brew with propane, so when you're brewing with propane, if you're going to do it in the garage, and I do, I'm very careful about it. If you brew in the garage, just make sure you have enough circulation. Open up the garage door so that you've got air circulating in and out. Otherwise, it's best to brew outside, just for safety reasons. But by and large, it's a really easy system to use, and I love it. So that is the 3-tier gravity-fed system.
All right. So that's that. That's the system. Now, one thing I want to point out is that is certainly not the only way of doing a 3-tier gravity-fed system. A lot of people use coolers for the mash tun, and instead of actually direct fire underneath the mash tun for heating it, they will use an infusion mash, which is you're introducing water that is probably anywhere between, depending upon ambient temperature and the temperature of the grain, anywhere between 7 to 10 degrees above your desired target temperature. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. But it's at least for me, I've found it to be a nice step up from brew in a bag. I still do brew in a bag sessions. In fact, I'll do a lot of brew in a bags when I'm trying to refine recipes or test out hops that I haven't worked with. But what I love about using the tier system is it's just really easy to use. For those who aren't really comfortable with working with 220 systems or mixing electricity with water, this is a nice way to get into brewing on a larger scale. And you have basically gravity doing the work of pushing the water down to the wort and the wort down to the kettle. So it's pretty nice. Eventually, I do plan on, like I said in the video, adding some pumps in there just to move some water around for me so I don't have to do heavy lifting. But by and large, what I like about it is just there's not a lot of things that can go wrong with it in terms of moving parts and components. And yeah, so let's see. I'm going to switch to a question here, and we'll be able to actually address this when we get into your piece, Jason. We'll do yours actually next, since Jeff is not here. Question from Will: how efficient is each method, and why would I switch from my 3-tier with 10-gallon coolers to another system? So, Jameson, Jason, let's start with you. How efficient, we haven't started in your system yet, but how efficient do you find your system to be when you're brewing?
I don't normally run for efficiency. I think my mash efficiency is usually in the mid to high 80s. Overall system efficiency, according to Beersmith 2, is somewhere in the high 70s. I try to get a pretty loose crush on my grain, and or systems that sparge, not brew in a bag or whatever, no sparge systems, the crush is probably the biggest part of efficiency. And I try to keep it really loose on mine. I had problems a while back with tannins, a lot of tannins in my beers, and the only thing I could think of is just abusing my grain in the crush. And it's definitely a lot better now, but some of that might have had to do with pH, which I've also gotten in check now. So you can have it. I mean, I know guys who run my system, the identical system to mine, and they achieve mash efficiencies like 93, 95%. So it can get pretty outrageous if you want it to. It's just not my goal.
Yep. What about for you, Jameson? What is your efficiency been like?
If I'm doing a no sparge setup, no sparge setup, I get a little bit less efficiency out of the mash. I still, squeeze the grain bag and all that kind of stuff to try and get as much liquid out as I can. That one I tend to, no sparge, I tend to get, maybe mid to upper 70s on my mash efficiency. If I sparge or do step mashing or anything like that, I can get well into the low 80s for mashing efficiency from brew in a bag, which is pretty good for brew in a bag. And then overall system, right around 80%, I think, on average for what I do. Now, I know a lot of people have had experiences with brew in a bag where they only get, 60, maybe 70% efficiency. I think brew in a bag gets a short shrift in that regard. I think you can get a lot higher. And to some degree, maybe the efficiency, the more you scale it up. If you're doing like 10-gallon batches of brew in a bag, at that level, maybe it's not quite enough. So,
yeah, 10-gallon brew in a bag. I think you would need like a winch to get that sucker out of the mash tun.
Totally.
And at least speaking from my own experience, my efficiency using the tier system I've got. Hey, welcome, Jeff. How's it going? Oh, can't hear you. Anyways.
There we go.
Hey, awesome.
On-air Hangouts default to mute. I forgot about that.
It's all right. Well, welcome aboard. We'll get to your system actually soon. We're going to do Jason's next, but we're briefly talking about efficiency. There was a question in Brew Nerds about how efficient is each method. Jason was sharing how he averages 80 to 85% on average, and Jameson's anywhere between 75% and about 80%. And on the tier system that I use, which is a lot like many, I usually average probably 85%. If you were to ask iBrewmaster, 100-some%, but that's bad math, I think, on their part. Actually, there was one batch I did got 107% efficiency according to iBrewmaster. I think they need to revisit their formulas. But Jeff, maybe talk a little bit about the efficiency that you usually get with your system.
Depends on the grist, but on average it's around 70.
And I found one other thing that might be good to clarify for Will is that there are a lot of variables that actually come into play that contribute to your efficiency, and that's the crush of your grain, as well as your mash duration. There's a lot of speculation in terms of, how much time do you actually need, but documents that I'm reading that I've received from Siebel talk a lot about the nitrogen count in your mash and the duration of your mash. You're reducing, trying to reduce your nitrogen count as well as reduce the pH level. And pH level has a lot to do with your efficiency as well, in terms of being able to extract the enzymes and the sugars that you want out of there. So,
is anybody actively measuring pH on their mashes?
Yeah, I usually, it depends upon the grist that I'm working with, but generally speaking, I'm dialing down to about 5.2 to 5.5 on average.
Do you have a meter, or are you using ColorFast?
Yeah, I use a digital meter, and I actually, for those who are really serious about measuring your pH, this sucker is, I highly recommend it. It was probably about $70, but it measures down to the 10th of a decimal and is really accurate and measures both temperature and pH. And I found it.
One I have.
So it's really nice. It's been great for helping me dial in the pH, but also the calibration's pretty easy. Usually, the one downer is that you actually have to. Excuse me, I'm in my brew room here. You have to buy additional solution for calibrating it. You usually have to buy 2 different buffer solutions, a high and a low end, and then additional storage solution. But it's been really great for measuring mash pH.
Yeah, I do the same thing with the same pH meter.
I'm low tech. I use the ColorFast strips.
Yep, those work too. And the thing is that, for the average home brewer, you don't have to worry too much about mash pH. It's only when you're really getting serious about your water profile and your extract efficiency and really dialing in and honing in your beer. So,
yeah, I tend to brew the same dozen or so recipes over the years, and I've brewed them so many times that I don't measure squat anymore. I don't keep gravity readings. I don't do any of that. I just know it works.
Yeah. Relax, have a home brew, right?
Mm-hmm.
As they say. All right, we're gonna move on to Jason's system. Jason runs a HERMS system, and I mean it's like beer porn, brewing porn. I love it.
Okay, I'm going to make a video for the Brew Nerds Community on Google+. I've never made an instructional video before. This is my first time, so bear with me. I didn't script this, rehearse, I didn't check the crap in my teeth or burrs in the nose or anything. So here we go. Topic is HERMS. What is HERMS? HERMS is Heat Exchange Recirculating Mash System. So that's what the acronym stands for. So what does that mean? All it means is the mash tun and the mash inside the mash tun is getting its heat from an exchanger, from another heated device. My particular system uses the hot liquor tank as that heat exchanger. But let's start with the components, individual components of my HERMS system. Standard hot liquor tank, there's not a whole lot that's unique or special about this. I'll point out a few things that are unique. It has to have some kind of recirculating port, which is what you see here. Now, we'll get to the recirculation method here in a minute, but this is basically the way the wort goes back in to the mash tun after it exits the heat exchanger. The other unique thing about this mash tun that might be different from yours or someone else who's not running a HERMS system is the temperature probe on the out of the mash tun. Now what that does is it just tells you, it doesn't really control anything, all it does is it tells me where the temperature's at, so I can monitor that. And I monitor that via, I'm not sure how you can see it on the video, but via this digital display right here. It's a PID, but don't be fooled by the fact it's PID. It doesn't control anything. I just use it to monitor. That's the way that the electric brewery is set up. You can find out more about the electric brewery at Cal Wallner's website, theelectricbrewery.com. Great information. More information than you probably know what to do with. It's a great site, and he's a great guy. So, the mash tun is the first component. The second component is the heat exchanger. It's also the hot liquor tank. So the cool thing about that, well, there's a bunch of them. Let's just start with, you're gonna have to sparge your mash anyways. So you're gonna need hot sparge water to do that. The cool thing about this is that hot sparge water, or water being, getting ready to sparge your beer, is also keeping your heat exchanger at the proper temperature. So the way this one runs, it might be a little bit different from some of the ones I've seen other people run, is I'm constantly recirculating from my mash tun through my wort pump, right down here. I'm not sure how this will come in the video. This is a March pump mounted to this upright here. And then out of that March pump and into here. Now this is the bottom end of a 50-foot copper coil that is inside my hot liquor tank. I chose to use copper for a number of reasons. It's more flexible, it's easy to work with. It conducts heat a little bit better, but to be honest, I think about any kind of coil you could use would do the job, considering it's 50 feet long and it's totally submerged in hot water. So stainless, copper, whatever you prefer. After it goes through that, into this port, it goes through 50 feet of copper, and 50 feet is all submerged in water that I keep exactly at my mash temperature. And after being exposed, even if you lose, a little bit of temperature coming out here and go through the pump, through all the hoses, by the time it gets through that 50 feet and comes back out here, it is at the temperature that I'm keeping this hot liquor tank at. So, let me give you a peek. Again, I'm not sure how this is going to come off on the video. Peek what we have inside here. Now, see the copper coil and the heating element right here. Now that's how the mash and the hot liquor tank get the heat. There is no heating element or burner or anything else inside this hot liquor tank, inside the mash tun. It all comes from right here. And it is controlled by this temperature probe right here. This temperature probe is monitored and controlled by this PID. There's another unique thing about this particular hot liquor tank is it has, just like the mash tun does, it has a return port on it. So you can kind of see, hopefully you can kind of see this return port right here. And why that's important, why it needs a return port, because you have to keep the water inside the heat exchanger in constant motion. If you don't, a heat layer will build up around the coil and you won't be able to control the temperature of your mash nearly as accurately as if the water is moving the entire time. So what I do is I use this water pump here to recirculate the hot liquor tank. So it comes out, goes in the water pump, comes out of the water pump, back in here, constantly keeps this in motion, and also is monitored by this probe. And when it gets off by a degree, this PID kicks in, heats the element heats the water heats the coil, mash goes through the coil, heats the mash, and puts it back in there. I actually have a great example of why you need to keep this in constant motion, water in constant motion in here. I just brewed 2 days ago, which was Saturday, February 17th. No, sorry, February 16th, 2013. And my mash was not very responsive to temperature changes. So I was getting the temperatures generally that I wanted right here, but on the mash PID, it wasn't catching up. It was within a degree of my hot liquor tank, but it wasn't responding quickly at all. It took a long time. Every time I made a temperature change in here, I did a protein rest, and then I went up to saccharification, and then I went to mash out. It took a while during each step of that process for it to get where it was going, and then even then it lagged behind by a single degree. When I went to finally sparge, to mash out sparge, what I do before I switch my hoses is I turn off both pumps and I shut all the valves. After I turned off the pumps and I began to shut the valves, I realized I'd only turned off one pump, but I didn't have another pump running. And that's when it hit me that I didn't have my water recirculation pump running at any point during that process. So the water was sitting here stagnant, it was building up a heat shield, a heat layer around the copper coil, and it wasn't controlling the temperature of the mash tun nearly as responsively as it normally does. So, let's go over the components one more time. Mash tun with false bottom, wort pump to recirculate through the coil, the copper coil inside the heat exchanger, the PID to monitor the mash tun, and the PID to control the temperature of the mash and the hot liquor tank, and the water pump that keeps the recirculation going inside here, so there's no heat layer building up around that coil. Is there anything else important that I need to cover about a HERMS system before I cut this video short? My first ever educational video short. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I don't think so. Well, yeah, one other benefit to this particular system is once I am ready to mash out, what I do, instead of routing the sparge water directly into the mash tun, is run it, instead of coming into the water pump and going back into here, it goes into the water pump and into the coil. So now you have 168, 170 degree water going into this coil, and it goes through the coil and into the mash tun as sparge water. The great thing about this is the entire time you're sparging, you're also cleaning out the inside of your coil with 170 degree water. So I used to run a different system. There are different ways to set up HERMS systems. But I always have run my sparge water this way though. My last HERMS system was, it's actually a 3-burner, 3-tiered HERMS system. It was just 3-tiered because I had set it up on a brew tree. It didn't necessarily need to be because I had a pump. But that one, all I did, I got my temperature in my mash to where I wanted it with a burner underneath the mash. And then I just maintained that temperature with the heat exchanger. Now this one has no dedicated heat in the mash tun whatsoever. It's completely heated by the elements in here. And once the mash out's done, it goes over to the boil kettle. And the boil kettle is pretty standard. It's an electric boil kettle, so there is a heating element inside there that does all my boiling for me. But other than that, there's nothing else unique about this. I have a whirlpool port, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the HERMS system. It's just a nice thing to have to leave true behind. I choose to use a Blickman Therminator. I'm not sure if you can see that or not either, but I like to leave as much of the brake material and hot matter behind in the kettle, so I whirlpool hot before going out to this kettle. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out.
All right. Well, that was a really good video, Jason. Very insightful. I've been watching your system from afar in pictures, and have to say that I've got gear envy. No, what I really like about the HERMS model is that what you pointed out towards the end is there's actual no heat occurring within the mash tun. It's all about bringing the wort into through a series of copper coils that are actually heated in your sparge tank. So maybe you could talk a little bit more to your system in terms of um, what it took for you to get into it, and what the cost was like for you, and a little bit more details about it.
Sure. I was building a house, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity while building a house to, design a space for the brew system that I was going to want to brew on, from now until the end of days or whatever. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger. When I dropped the price tag on my wife, she didn't really make a comment. So actually, she kind of shrugged, which surprised the living heck out of me. So I within about a week, I was emailing with the guy at theelectricbrewery.com, Cal Wallner, and trying to decide whether or not I wanted to build the control panel or if I wanted to, just go ahead and buy one pre-made. Considering I know nothing about the electric stuff at all, it sounds like a blast. But I have a full-time job and a 5-year-old son and a brewing hobby, so I had to figure I had the time to learn a hobby and put it all together. My guess is it probably ended up costing maybe about $6,000 right around there.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the stainless steel counters in the sink. Maybe another. I don't even know. I can't even remember. I'm gonna guess and say 20, 25. $3,000.
So basically, you're coming into a system that probably is cost prohibitive to a number of people. But what would you say has been the advantage of switching to the HERMS system from from maybe a traditional 3-tier or whatever?
I'd say control. I mean, I know a lot of people do really well with coolers, and that's after building a system like this that you put this much time into, because I did do a lot of the work myself, even though I didn't build the panel myself, and it cost this much money. Start thinking about a lot of other systems, and to be honest, a lot of it, I think a lot of the allure is like you said, brew porn, because you can do a lot with a cooler. It holds the temperature so well. I mean, Jameson pointed that out. It's amazing how well those things hold temperature. But for me, I always did stainless. I had a friend who got me into brewing, and he swore by just using stainless steel pans and trying to turn the burners on at the right time and just to keep the temperature right, which was a nightmare for me. I mean, my entire brew days were stressful. I was constantly trying to kick on and off burners at the right time manually to control temperatures and stuff. So I thought this was a natural evolution, and it does control temperatures really, really well. And having the pumps, of course, is easy to transfer. I can see into the top of all my kettles and whatnot. So I mean, to be honest, a system like mine, the advantages are pretty small unless you really like the unless you really like the brew porn and you like gear that works really, really well, and you don't really have to rig anything once you get it all set up. There's not a lot of changes I want to make anymore, really just chilling, but that's a different conversation entirely. So, I don't know, I just don't think that people have to spend that kind of money, that's all. And I realize that more now than I did before I spent the money. But plenty of people make great beer with really, really simple equipment.
Yeah. I've just opened up the hangout to other members of the community, so we got people popping in here. So we'll have a chance for some open Q&A in a little bit. But Jason, I wanted to field this question to you, and it says, this is from Michael, I'm not even going to try his last name, Santo Pietro, I think. Forgive me if I slaughtered it. He says, I've been mulling over a hybrid gas-electric system for a while. What I'm picturing would be a heating element and a HERMS coil in the hot liquor tank and a gas burner for the boil kettle. Are there any obvious disadvantages to such a system that I'm just not thinking of?
I can't say that there are any disadvantages to that. I mean, the only one is you can't brew completely enclosed indoors. That would be the only disadvantage. A system like that would work just fine if you crack the garage door a little bit, or make sure you have good airflow. But that's it. I mean, the disadvantage is very small. I actually considered before I did this doing a Blickman brew stand, the 3-tier brew stand, with just a RIMS tube. It was going to be a hybrid. mostly gas with just an electric temperature control RIMS tube. And I still think that's a really good way to go. A couple of the guys in our brew club do that. Not quite what he's talking about, but I don't think there's any problem doing a hybrid of a gas and electric system at all. They go for it.
Yeah, I think the distinct advantage that you've got with your system is that, or the electric system, is you can do it entirely indoors and you're not restricted by the elements necessarily.
Yeah, that's nice.
And that is a big safety tip for all the people out there considering direct fire systems using propane. You can't do that indoors unless you've got the garage door cracked at least a third of the way. You really need that air circulation because of all the carbon monoxide that's generated from burning propane, along with what other chemical byproducts are generated from it as well. With those that have joined us, any questions about the HERMS system? I don't see any questions specifically within the community, but I'd see if anyone else had questions about that before we move on. No questions from Brad. Welcome. Glad you could join us. Putting you on the spot.
I'm not sure if my audio is working on this machine.
Yep, your audio is working fine.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I just got here,
Good.
so I missed half the HERMS thing, but
Hey,
it's all
Brad.
good.
And we've also got Michael Santopietro. I think that's his last name. God, I really hope it's right. But I don't see any video, so we just have him hang out. We're going to move on to the last system by Jeff Krapinski, and it's Brutus Countertop 20, I believe it's called. And Jeff, you're going to have to forgive me, but you're an overachiever, man. I had to edit your video down to like 8 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. I was doing double duty with that. I have a lot of people around the world ask about the system, so now it's on YouTube. Go look at it.
Yep. And speaking of YouTube, I'm going to on Google Plus, our community Brew Nerds, I'm going to actually post a link to the playlist of all these videos. They'll be up on YouTube, Jeff's specifically, his video, there will be a link to the full-length video, so if you want to watch all 24, 25 minutes of it with the really awesome music, you can. But we're going to show a short edited version, an 8-minute long one, and Jeff, I removed the music from it, so if you'd like to speak to what we're looking at.
Perfect.
And that would, you can give us a guided tour, and I spliced out a lot of the moving around and doing stuff and kept a lot of the key components that I thought would be important. So perfect. I'll just give this a run, and you can walk us through it.
Okay, so this is the Countertop Brutus 20. My design goals here were 1 indoors, 2 small batch, and 3 120 volts. So it's really ideal for working out of your kitchen and not having to go outside and freeze your butt off to brew beer. Pretty standard brew kettle here, 120 volt, 2 kilowatt water heater element in the basement, in the bottom there. Your standard 5-gallon cooler, NorCal Brewing false bottom. I like theirs because it has a little stand. There's no special plumbing involved in setting that one up. This is probably the key trick to my system, where I integrate a March pump with a permanently plumbed counterflow chiller right on top of it. So it's very space-saving, very efficient. You're not changing a lot of plumbing during the brew day that's going to be messy and dripping all over the kitchen floors. Very simple control system, the ubiquitous Auber Instruments PID, and a simple little timer that I bought for keeping track of mash times. I got it on eBay for a couple bucks. What are we doing here?
And this is the review of your, this is an edited version of your brew day here, and I think you're starting out heating up your strike water.
Yep. And we're throwing in, mixing in salts. So much like the RIMS system, this one is typically used in continuous recirculation. So once you've doughed in, the wort flows out of the mash tun back into the kettle. where it's heated to your ideal mash temperature and then pumped back up to the top of the mash, so it's constantly circulating. This brew day I was actually brewing my Old Chub, Oscar Blues Old Chub clone, which is a pretty challenging brew because it's over 13 pounds of grist in a 5-gallon mash tun. And without a system like this, it pretty much isn't doable in 5 gallons. But because a certain percentage of your wort, typically 2 gallons, is always sitting in the mash tun, in the kettle, you can basically oversubscribe this system. So there's more beer in here than would technically fit in the mash tun at any given moment. But because it's continually recirculating, you can get away with a little bit more. There's actually 6 gallons of liquid, plus the grist going through this right now.
So during your mash, are you actually recirculating?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Generally speaking.
Maybe if I could freeze this and you could somehow explain how, because I didn't get that picture when I was looking through the video of how and where you're recirculating. So you have a pump somewhere that's actually doing the.
Yep, inside that Home Depot bucket there is a pump,
okay.
the Marks pump at the bottom,
that's great.
And then a counterflow chiller on top that's just always permanently plumbed in. So
okay.
So this is literally like 10 minutes after I had doughed in. I'm already basically setting the grain bed, doing a short boil off. I'll return that wort to the top, and then I'll begin the recirculation. And I did what did I do in this one? I think I did a 90-minute mash. So for 90 minutes, this was just constantly recirculating, nice and slow. The BID is regulating the temperature, keeping it exactly where I want it for the entire mash duration. So what has been what system did you come from? What were you using before you started working with your eBrutus system? I went from extract to this. This was my first and only all grain system.
Wow, that's quite a jump.
And that was 5 or so years ago. So I've made very few mods to it. I mean, I've been happy with the system and got no inclination to go anywhere else. I am a small batch brewer, so everything is focused around basically 4 gallons of finished beer in the kettle after chilling, and then from there I'll run off 3.5 into a corny. I ferment in a corny. And then once the finished beer, then I'll push it with gas to a 3-gallon serving corny. So I'm always going for finished, 3 gallons of beer to go into my kegerator. I'm the only the only beer drinker in the house. So I got bad ADD. So after 3 gallons, I'm ready to do something different. So there, I believe you can see we're recirculating, so you can see the wort flowing back into the top,
as well as the cat.
We have way too many cats. We put it throughout the video.
So maybe let's see. What has been what is probably the easiest thing about using your system, and what is probably the most challenging thing about using the Brutus?
I would say easiest is like any good brewing system, is very reproducible. I mean, once you've learned it, I mean, setting mash temps, I mean, you can kind of set and forget. Probably because there's no flow regulation back into the mash tun, you basically monitor the inflow into the kettle and then the return back to the mash tun through a sight gauge that's on the kettle. But so it can take a little bit of fiddling to reach equilibrium to make sure you're not pushing more up than coming out. And if you're really not paying attention, it's going to overflow and make your wife mad. Here, so the zip through the boil there. So I think we did a 90-minute boil on this as well. So the boil's finished up. At the tail end of the boil, basically start recirculating again to sanitize that counterflow chiller. So the last 10 minutes, you throw in your Werflock tablet and just let things recirculate to sanitize everything inside. I've already hooked up the red hose there is hooked up right to the kitchen sink for cold water for chilling. Actually, now killing the power. So I think at this point, chilling may be just about done. Yep. Yeah, I tend to move the kettle over once chilling's complete because the counter's really hot and I don't want the heat to soak back into the kettle. And this kettle.
are you just running a basic 120?
Yep. So I was about to touch on that. So this kettle is 6.5 gallons. It's basically your typical stainless turkey fryer. But to get a really good vigorous boil on more than 5 gallons out of 120 volts is really kind of pushing it. So I do have the kettle wrapped with some duct, the sticky duct insulation you pick up at Home Depot. With that little bit of insulation, I can get a good vigorous boil on 5 gallons really easy.
Nice, very nice.
And in most modern kitchens, I mean, anything built after the 80s by code is supposed to have 2 separate 20 amp circuits for small appliances. So you're safe with a 2,000 watt element, because that's basically going to draw, a hair over 16 amps. So you're fine on a 20 amp circuit.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up in terms of using the 20 amp circuit. And if you've got an older house, check your like if you're on a fuse system like we are in my house, you would definitely want to make sure that you're on a yes. line that is serviced by 20 amps. Yeah, you really don't want to guess with this stuff. You want to know exactly what you have, that your wiring is to code, that you really got 20 amp. In my opinion, electricity is much safer than propane, but you got to know what you're doing. Well, thanks a lot for putting that video together, Jeff. I really appreciate it, and I think it'll be really insightful. And again, this system was actually featured on Brew Your Own, and we'll have links to that, all this stuff out on YouTube. In fact, I'm going to post it right now. Yeah. Where are we for members? Last time we checked, we were at like 999 members. And nice. We hit the 1,000 during your video. We're still there at 9.
Still one member down.
Cost-wise for the Countertop Brutus 20, that was also a factor. I wanted to try to build, a good, reliable all-grain system for indoors, but not break the bank. And anybody with, a reasonable, tinkering skill set. I mean, being able to, sweat copper pipe and so forth to make the counterflow chiller. You could build this system for under $500.
So I have a question for you, Jameson. It looked like you were having to do a lot of hands-on during the brew session. It wasn't a very hands-off brew session from what the video looked like.
Mm-hmm. Actually, to stop you right there, I edited a lot of it down, so it is pretty hands-off, I would say.
Okay. So I was just kind of curious if that affected repeatability of brews at all, or.
No, it's extremely repeatable. I mean, you got the PID that's managing your mash temp. I know what my boil-off rates are. They're not really terribly variable, so I hit the same volume, same gravity every time I brew the same beer.
Well, excellent. I think we're going to wrap up this hangout. I think it was awesome to give all of our community members and the rest of the world out there who are looking into maybe stepping up from extract into another system. And again, these are just 4 methods of a whole host of options. There's one thing that we try and communicate regularly in Brew Nerds is that there's not necessarily one right way to do this. Here we present a brew in a bag, a typical 3-tier system, HERMS and RIMS, and there are other methods of brewing as well. And certainly we don't mean to exclude them, but I want to just give a brief overview on how these systems work. And if you have more questions about these systems and how they work, join us over at Brew Nerds at bit.ly/brewnerds, and we'd be glad to answer any questions you've got. So with that, I want to thank Jason Grizzly, and I want to thank Jeff Pinsky for showing your systems, as well as Jameson Steppen. And I am Michael Tangen, the founder of Brew Nerds, and thanks so much for joining us on today's Hangout, and we hope to see you next month. We'll put it out to the community and see what topic we'll address in next month's Hangout. So thanks a lot for joining us, and peace out. Cheers.
Thanks, Michael. Cheers.